Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Once again, brother, welcome.
Once again.
Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah, mashallah.
Today you talked about the lack of faith between brothers and Islam. How could we get that back?
Hard question. Hard question. And we were talking about an aspect of Iman, or we can say a fundamental part of Iman, is our interpersonal relationships, right? How we deal with them is part of Iman, right? To be more clear, we can't separate our treatment of each other from Iman. You know, we have the hadith, لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى يحب لأخيه ما يحب لنفسه. That hadith is well known, mashhur. Says sound hadith, but it's well known. It's like spread out. Young and old know it, that none of you believes or none of you has Iman till you love for your brother what you love for yourself. That's an important principle to operate by. And we can't be exclusive in that. We make excuses to be exclusive in that. And we have a lot of details that we tried to bring in and who we exclude, from that circle of brotherhood. And is odd because Imam Nawawi rahmatullahi alayhi, in his explanation of that hadith, in his own explanation of the 40 hadith, this hadith comes up in the 40 hadith as well as the major collections. But he includes the non-Muslim in that, your neighbor, as having the rights of some rights of brotherhood, to that extent that the neighbor, is included in that. And that has been a big debate among some of the scholars with regard to, how it is that we deal with people overall. But here he gives us that framework, and we know from the prophetic example that the neighbor, regardless of what their background is, has a big role in Islam. That's we have obligations towards our neighbors. But the hadith overall talks about the importance of Iman and loving for our brothers was good by default, because what we should love for ourselves is what's good. So that if we go deep into the hadith, there should be some assumption there that we're talking about a healthy person. Because if a person, here is saying that you love for, yourself, right? Certain things, and those things that you love for yourself, you should love them for your brother. None of you believes till you love for your brother what you love for yourself. And I think that this is the key issue that we struggle with. Do we really love ourselves properly? Right? Do we identify with our humanity enough that we can identify with the humanity of another person? I guarantee you, if you go deep enough into your own humanity, you should be able to have empathy with another human being. That's why I started off with the whole idea of the non-Muslim, right? That there's a basic line that's there. How do you deal with the non-Muslim? Well, especially in the case of non-Muslim being your neighbor has rights. You can't just, pass off the idea that because this person is a non-Muslim, that I have no obligations towards that person. That's not Islamic. And that's a whole conversation by itself. But it's important to be there to say, well, hold on a second. If the deen even includes that the non-Muslim has a right over me, then what about the Muslim brother? What about the Muslim brother? If the non-Muslim, the neighbor in this case, it could be Muslim or non-Muslim, right? But the neighbor, let's draw that line out. If the neighbor was emphasized so much that the Sahaba felt that the neighbor was going to get rights of inheritance, the right of the neighbor was emphasized so much with regard to how we should deal with the neighbor, that the Sahaba felt Well, are they going to inherit from us? You know what I'm saying? Then what about the Muslim brother? Somewhere along the line, we've fallen off on this point. And that's why we have to come back to ourselves. Like, are we putting ourselves in the position of our Muslim brothers? That's the first. You talk about how to get it back. That empathy has to be there. Empathy is different than pity. Empathy is where, it's like there's an equality in it. Whereas pity is you coming from a high horse and you're looking, feeling sorry for the person. No, but when you put yourself in that person's place, when you're empathetic, when you open up your emotions, then you can start to feel, where that, and that opens the door for building a better relationship. The other issue is having a clear understanding that this is not a compromisable point. This is a principle in the deen. It's not a debatable point. The Quran, it talks about the believers being brothers. And we mentioned that in the khutbah, we mentioned that point, and in the context that the Quran brings it out in is one of certainty. إِنَّمَا الْمُؤْمِنِينَ إِخْوَةٌ. There's no room for doubt there. There's no room for confusion because of the way that the language is operating. And so that is another element that we have to bring to the table. We've lost that because of the way that we deal with educating ourselves on practice. So we make an excuse, this one is from that school of thought, or this school of thought, or this school of Aqidah, or that school of Aqidah. But this is not a school of Aqidah point. This is deen, right? The school of Aqidah points come in details and things that are not clear in the Quran. But that issue is clear. The rabit, the tie-in between iman and ukhuwah in the Quran is clear. Like, there's no debate on that issue. And the other thing that comes in is that in this context of this ayat, the issue of conflict resolution comes to the fore. So the Quran is not talking about this idealistic form of brotherhood that doesn't assume that people are going to fall out. There's an assumption that people are going to fall out. So what's brought to the table is, make the conditions better. But how we get that back, I believe, is like emotionally we have to train ourselves to put ourselves in the position of others. That feeling has to be there. And we have to look at ourselves like, what's going on within ourselves. And we were talking about earlier in the story of Yusuf. Sometimes we have issues. Sometimes I don't like to see the other brother shine, or the other brother have the microphone, or the other brother be more successful materially. We feel some sort of weight. And the problem with that is that that's between that person and Allah. You don't know what that person's state really is. Exteriorly, you may think that it's all fun and games and great. And behind the scenes, mashallah, people are doing well materially, but behind the scenes, that could be a mess. Or it could be a beautiful reality. Right? But the point in that is that, is not to transgress the limits. Like, that's that person's life. Like, relax. Where you at, you have to deal with your situation. The comparison sometimes it brings in a dynamic where brotherhood is not possible. And the distinguishing and so on and so forth. And that's the madhab of Iblis. The way of Iblis. I'm on fire. He's clay. There's been some Muslim thinkers, they talked about like racism is like that. That, that concept is a satanic concept. Because our concept about humanity has one origin. There's no such thing as human races. Although we use it on a regular basis, we say racist, but no, the human race is one. You know what I'm saying? So those things clarifying the way we understand people, like this, that we have this a single origin. We were all created by Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala, and then putting ourselves in the position of other people, slowing down about me, it being only about me, and, see where the other person is at, in terms of my life, how I feel about that. And then the principle of the deen being clear to us that this is not a negotiable. This is a thing that has to be established the same way we struggle to establish salah. You know what I'm saying? Is at that level. It has to be established. It's tied into Iman. And the Quranic concept ties it into Iman. And the Hadith brings it back to that reality. It negates Iman, actually. Although it's saying that your Iman is not complete. But if you take the language literally, it's like you don't have any Iman. None of you believes. Alhamdulillah that the language doesn't, push that extent. But we should, look at it from that angle. Take it literally for the sake of our own discipline. But that's not what it means. It means that our Iman is not complete until we love for our brothers what we love for ourselves. But if we were to say, just as a form of discipline, you don't believe, I talked to Yusuf, you don't believe to love for your brother what you love for yourself. That would be, a changing point. So we hold ourselves accountable. How am I treating this, this brother? Because we make a lot of excuses to alienate or to push people away or to, not build the relationship with them. So we have to have some corrective in that regard.
What's the importance of the masjid in the community?
The masjid is central, right? The masjid is central in our lives. And you see that in the prophetic example. Medina was established on two foundations after Iman. First was brotherhood and making sure that the affairs of the Muslims were accounted for. That's where the brotherhood comes in, right? And the brotherhood pact that we saw in Medina, where the Prophet ﷺ paired people together, that began in Mecca. It's why in our conversations, I believe we were talking about it was the prophetic life was strategic. The Prophet was strategic in how he dealt with people. It wasn't haphazard. It wasn't just something that appeared because it's mashallah. No, the Prophet took a path so that it could be taken, alayhi salatu wasalam, by us. So one of the things he ensured is that people had a sense of well-being. And that's something that's extremely important to understand when we talk about community building, when we talk about the health of the community, when we talk about people staying in Iman. One of the categories in zakat is mu'allafat al-qulub. To give the people zakat, there's the category of giving people zakat to soften their heart, to have their hearts reconcile with us. It's not a bribery point. It's to show them the goodness of the deen, in that regard. To show them we got them. Especially in this case, because the poor people, they have a right in zakat. But in this case, we're letting them know you're part of a community that takes care of you, right? So the Prophet established that reality first. The Muslims caring for each other. That's important because that came before the masjid. Yes, there was Dar al-Arqam, there was Masjid al-Quba. But when the Masjid al-Nabawi was founded, by that time, the system of caring for each other was in place because the Prophet was rebuilding a broken society, right? People, they fell out with their families, with their friends because of Iman, because they wanted to change, because what was there was not working. As far as lifestyle, belief, values, it wasn't working. So they were willing to undertake that change of themselves, their customs, their way of doing things, their way of seeing things on a personal level, to come into the reality of Iman. That's the precursor to the masjid. And before anything else is established in Medina, in light of the Prophet coming there or being there, is the masjid that's established. And the Prophet ﷺ established that masjid in such a way that people didn't feel offended, right? Because everybody was pulling him in their direction. So if he would have established it wherever it was they were pulling him to, people would have felt, well, he favored them over us. You know what I'm saying? So the Prophet was neutral in that regard. And so the life of the Muslims in Medina, it was based on the masjid. And it wasn't just a place of salah. It was the heart of the community. So some of those aspects of that type of masjid that we saw in the prophetic time, we have some of those. Some of those qualities exist in the Islamic centers. Overseas, some of the masajid are like museums or like just salah and that's it. We have that. But we've lost attachment to the masjid for a lot of different reasons. But we can't move forward without, the masjid. That's why the masjid, we have to get the masjid concept right, even if it takes us 15, 20 years. We have to get the concept correct. Because the community exists based on the masjid. Technically speaking, you can have a small group establish the salah, and the rest of the community is alleviated from the responsibility. But everybody that is a responsible male and Muslim, they're obligated to the Jummah at minimum. And so, yes, we don't live in an Islamic state or something like that. It's not that easy to establish all the 5 salawat, or even sometimes 2 salawat a day, Fajr and Isha. But the idea that at bare minimum the Jummah is there is just an indication so that we see the importance of the coming together in the masjid. It's a coming together in the masjid, right? And then if you take it more than that, the actual establishment of the salah and men building that up, taking the responsibility to build that up, you see from there, you know what I'm saying, the importance of community, because that's basically what the masjid is aiming at. It's the worship of Allah in community. If you go to the traditional fiqh, especially you see this in the Maliki school, you see this in the Hanafi school, the concept of community is there. In the Hanafi school, if the city is not occupied by Muslims, so to speak, and they're not in their environment, there's some question, there's some discussion that comes up. Is the Jummah an obligation or not? Of course, that doesn't mean that we're not going to establish Jummah because we're not living in a Muslim city. But that's not the point of the example. The point of the example is how they were thinking. They're thinking the community has to be established around the masjid. So much so that they made Jummah an obligation based on that reality. Are the people there? You know what I'm saying? Is the community there? In the Maliki school, the idea of Al-Jami Masjid, which is not that easy to establish in many places with the numbers that we have nowadays, but it's the big principal masjid. It means that if you lived in your small neighborhood with your musalla or whatever, then when it came time to Jummah, you come to the Jami Masjid, you come to the big masjid, everybody leave their spaces and we come together. So the thinking there is the same concept. Muslims being together, like the idea of everybody on their own was not part of the way that Muslims thought. So the establishment of the salah itself, iqamat as-salah, is depending on the concept of the masjid. You see what I'm saying? And the lifestyle of the Muslim surrounded by the masjid, right? And in this society, 20 years back, before the internet was dominant, that's how you aligned, associated, hooked up with the Muslim brothers. That's where you met the Muslim sister. Somebody from the masjid knew somebody. You see what I'm saying? You had to go through the community in order to even build family. That was the reality, that it was a spot that you go to, that you pray, you see the brothers. It was your hangout spot in the halal sense. You know what I'm saying? So that was there. We understood that concept. And then, whatever reasons came in and we kind of disassociated. And more, that's what you're seeing. And the generation is growing up that will never experience what it means to pray 5 times a day together, even though that's part of the deen. A generation will come and may completely disassociate from the masjid. That's why we had the unmosque movement. You started seeing people just not see the masjid as central. But the masjid is the center for Muslim revival, the center for maintaining Iman, is the center for Muslim identity, is the center even for political action. Because people, when you talk about the Muslims, the politicians come to the masjid. That's just the reality of this. It's the place where we expose the youth, to be able to see Islam outside of the family, in the larger sense. It's supposed to be the place that we come and we get our knowledge of Islam as well. You know what I'm saying? It's the place where how many people come when they have problems, they come to the masjid, and they're looking for support in different forms, in different ways. In that sense, those who have their hearts attached to the masjid, they have a special place with Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. But the importance of the masjid is our survival and our growth, not just survival. So we have to, be locked into that if we want to develop ourselves, even if it means that, we just go a few times a week.
Often the community is asked to support the masjid. What does it look like when it's on the other hand?
It's a mutual process. The believers are the ones that maintain the masajid. The believers are the ones that maintain the masajid. It's a Quranic principle. But also, if the community needs the masjid is established to service the community. After the fundamental worship of Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala and Salah, the masjid is there to also service the community. It's not a club. It's not a cultural club, although you find some of that there. But it's not a cultural club in that regard. It's like a place that the masjid should be tending to the needs of the community. It's the last frontier that we have when it comes to having some institution that is concerned with the affairs of the Muslims. There's not too many institutions that you can turn to or authority figures to say, well, these people are in charge of the affairs of the Muslims, without thinking about, well, the masjid is supposed to take on that responsibility. There's a lot of debates. How far is the masjid obligated? But some people, they do that to disengage from the responsibility. Oh, well, the masjid is not about social services. Oh, well, the masjid is not about education. Oh, well, the masjid is not a place for people to come and hang out. There's a lot of excuses that are given for the masjid not to fulfill the role of meeting the community, where it's at to help the people make their iman firm. You know what I'm saying? And they do that through certain activities. They do that to having a space where they can be Muslim uninhibited. You're not going to do that. You can rent a hotel, but there's only so far that you can go. You rent a hotel to do a community activity. So the masjid, it goes both ways. The people support the masjid and the masjid support the people. But the maintainers of the masjid is the community, the people of Iman. But a masjid is not going to have continuity if it's not servicing the people. And alhamdulillah, we have examples. So this is not like theory now. We have some examples of some masajid that have become intergenerational masajid. You know what I mean by that? That there was an older generation that raised their children in that masjid, and now those children have become adults and have their children there, and then their children now are the ones that are in charge of the masjid. You have some communities like that. When you lack a space for the youth, then what you begin to see is that the masjid starts to, the masjid attendance or the strength of the masjid attendance fizzles. So you don't have anyone to really replace. So it becomes an institution that's full of old people without any young people. That's the danger of pushing the young people out. You understand what I'm saying? And I don't know if you ever seen that example. There's always is an example that's used to kind of highlight Turkey. That they have a space where there's toys in the masjid, and sometimes there's even these memes about hearing the voices of the youth in the masjid or the children in the masjid being a healthy sign of the continuity. They have that concept. There's some truth to that reality. Right? There's truth to that reality. That's why we have to be careful of who gets to dominate the way that the masjid is perceived by the youth. So if if it's the case that we're screaming at the youth because they're talking loud, or the youth, if they break something, then there's issue and we push them out, then we killed the masjid. From our side, of course, everything comes back to Allah at the end of the day. But what we're doing is that we're pushing the youth out of the masjid. And that has happened. There was a masjid where the youth that were working for their parents or for their uncles or community members in the gas stations were being picked up by one brother who would get all of the youth. He would do two things. He would pray with them. Sometimes there was a scammer late, and he would open up the gym so that they could have a basketball competition. So these youth started coming to the masjid from this effort that the brother made. And he had them praying, and he had them playing. And he had them building community together. They broke one of the doors, and after that it was a wrap. They shut the youth out. The youth were nowhere to be seen. So that whole effort collapsed, right? So the dilemma with that is the children of the same community that gave the money at one time for the masjid. So now their own children are being pushed out of the masjid. They are allowing that. You see what I'm saying? And so that shows that, when the masjid becomes alienating like that we are even neglecting the task that the masjid has to ensure that we're doing the outreach to the youth. The Sahaba, one of the things that you see when the Prophet ﷺ passed away or was passing away is that he, ﷺ, had established Usama as a head of a military expedition of the older companions. Now, the amazing thing is that the Muslims were in a serious crisis. The Prophet is passing away, transitioning from this world to the hereafter. Alayhi salatu wasalam. Anybody looking from the outside will be like, yeah, now they're coming to an end. Their leader is passing away. Omar, radiallahu anhu, the spectacular, amazing Sahabi, he's not totally in his mind 100%. He can't accept the reality. And this is not what we call ta'an fi Sahaba. It's not like disrespecting or criticizing the Sahaba. It's describing his state. He didn't want to accept that the Prophet had passed away. The crisis overcame him. He wasn't in a position to lead there, right? And it was Abu Bakr as-Siddiq that stepped up to the, occasion. There's descriptions that there were companions that were standing up. They had to sit down when they heard the news that the Prophet passed away. In other words, the community was hit. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, radiallahu anhu, he monitors the situation. He steps up to the occasion. He reminds Umar of the reality of the Quran and makes sure that the principle and Aqidah is in place, that we worship Allah. We don't worship a human being. And lets it be known that we've been educated properly by the Prophet on what deen is, so that deen continues to exist after the Prophet transitions from this world to the hereafter, alayhi salatu wasalam. And at the same time, he kept in place the fact that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam wanted Usama, right, to lead the youth. He wanted the youth to take the lead of the elders, and that made the Muslim community look like a masterful community in crisis management. Not only did they handle the situation of the transition of the leader, they kept moving with the defense of the community, and they included the youth in the process. And that's why you see, for instance, later on, Ibn Abbas becomes one of the greatest scholars in the deen, because he was a youth that grew up in the community. They took him under their wing. You see what I'm saying? They took him under their wing. And that's why the generation that was coming and growing up from among themselves, they had capacity to move forward. And that's the same thing, for instance, when they went into Iraq, it was brought to the attention of Ali Karamallahu Wajh that the youth, the Arabic, was becoming corrupted. And so they feared, because if their language was becoming corrupted, it's going to mean that the understanding of the Quran was going to become corrupted. So Abu Aswad al-Du'li was given the responsibility of making sure that they had strong Arabic language education. These people didn't exclude the youth. They built the youth. They had a passing of the passing of the baton. They had a transition plan in place, and they didn't look at themselves as just holding on to the reins and that's it. But they were making sure that this next generation was coming, and they were prepared, to move forward. So that's an important piece in terms of, the community, in terms of how we deal with the youth, in terms of the role of the masjid in that regard, overall in fulfilling that.
So how do you think we can make the masjid more welcoming for the youth?
I don't think that there's like a one solution to that. Is like it has to be studied and understood, right? That if we were talking about what's the solution to that, it's let's figure that out. Because in the beginning, it may mean going out with the youth outside of the masjid, but we're strategizing from the masjid, because they may not necessarily want to come to the masjid like that. But just as an example, they may be more open to go bowling or, hiking in the mountains. What is it that you call the Adirondacks?
The Adirondacks, yeah.
That was one of my, go to on my checklist in life. I want to hike, those mountains. But they may want to do that. They may want to go swimming. You see what I'm saying? But incorporating them in that sense of showing them that the masjid is with you in your life, not just in the space. You know the difference? The masjid is with you. The deen is with you in your life. We're with you in your life, not just in the space that you play Muslim, like the way girls play doll or house. They play house with their dolls in an artificial space. No, we're in the business also about, okay, the masjid extends out there, with you. So the example is that we have to kind of see where the youth are. Everybody's not in the same place, but also opening up the masjid to the youth. Sleepovers, letting them be involved, letting them have teaching them from an early age, educating them on the issue of leadership from an early age. That's what we're lacking. But if we would teach them from an early age the skill sets that are needed to run the masjid, then the future administrations that we have will be on a completely other level. The other issue is getting these youth at their early age in the masjid to memorize Quran with some understanding, to create those types of experiences, right? To ensure that the talks that come through, the masjid, that there's some component at which we're sensitive to the fact that we're speaking to the khutbah, the same thing, or maybe even have youth khutbahs. And a big one is, if you want to get a lot of the youth to the masjid that are at their age, is facilitate the marriage process, right? Because at this time, and that may mean cooperating with other masajid. And that used to be done. So this is not like that used to be done. You know what I'm saying? The masajid in Philadelphia were connected with the masajid in New York and the masajid in Ohio, and we knew, sisters were over here and brothers were over here. We could do a character check. We that capacity was there in the community before technology came in the way that it is now. But the issue of the masjid cooperating to meet the needs of the youth, that's important. Yeah, those are things. So see where they at, see what they want as well, and then negotiate with them, and have things that are geared towards them as well. Include them in the education and the conversation, and get them at an early age. We're worried about the noise that they're making. Well, we need them to have the experience of the masjid is part of my life.
How important is the imam?
There's the understanding of Islam, and then there's the understanding of how we're built in the masajid.
Two different things.
Yes, like, Dr. Hassan Bagby, he's up in age now. He did research in two different periods on the same question, the status of the masjid in basically American Muslim life. It's one of the only studies that's done by Muslims themselves, and really like working with the community to get data. We have some other institutions that have come in and try to do work like ISPU in that regard. But this study, the masjid study, is important. There was one that was done in the early 2000s and one that was done recently. And so there he types meaning he categorizes what kind of masjids do we have. So one of the concepts, it was the one that was Imam centered. And that was mostly in the African American community. Although he left out the fact that there was Imam centered and board, which was kind of what you saw with the Ward of Deen community. But in the past, one of those strong Imam centered masjids was like Imam Talib, MIB in New York, or Imam Siraj, that type of model masjid. Imam Mutawif Shaheed in Ohio, Cleveland, and Imam Dawood Shabazz. These were imams from the older generation, or what you saw in the Dar Islam movement. Those were imam-centered masjids. But if you look at the situation very closely, all those imams prove something to the community of leadership. It wasn't just coming into a role and that's it. It was they proved to the community that they were leaders and they could build. They contributed something back and they built that trust relationship. They may not have been scholars and spending 20 years or 15 years in Medina or Egypt, but they were real leaders in understanding how to work with the people, how to organize them, how to build for them. Institution built. That was one type of masjid. And then we mentioned the idea of the, masjid and the board. More ideal type of relationship is where it's cooperative between those two entities. And then there's the other type of masjid where the board is very strong and the imam is very weak. And then there's the imamless masjid, where it's a community that just anybody comes in and gives khutbah, whatever. There's no real figure. Wallahi, I watched this survey, and with the increase of these imamless masjids, I don't have the data to make the connection 100%, but you began to see the increase of doubts in Islam. You began to see the increase of people leave Islam because there's nobody in the community to what? To guide the community. There's nobody in the community to like walk people through. And some of these masajid, even if the imam, like Imam Dawood Shabazz, rahmatullahi alayhi, he loved Malcolm. So he followed Malcolm's example. He had a sheikh from Ghana that was in the community. Although he was not a person of Islamic sciences, he got somebody. You see what I'm saying? So it's not like these imams were totally off as well. You know what I'm saying? Just doing their own thing. They were taking guys. So he had established that type of model where he had a sheikh in the community, and he was the leader. The sheikh was an advisor. So he was able to build. So with what we see with these types of masajid, the imamless masjid or the weak imam position, these communities, they don't really build a strong foundation in the people. And some of them have even fallen into major fitna. We have like that type of example in Ohio. We have models of all these different types of masajids in Ohio. And one of the most successful, and I hate to say it because people don't like it, is when the imam had the support of the people versus being at the mercy of the people. One of the masjids that is in Ohio, the imam had the real leadership position. So he built the whole neighborhood. They slowly bought house by house by house. They built the school. They expanded the masjid. They put the masjid on a solid economic foundation. That's not always the case, but that's going to take place like that. But the leader took a role and the people followed. Others, where they had multiple boards, they fell into lawsuits and disputes with the imam and disputes with themselves, and and that type of politics just kept coming in and in like that. So in today's time, we're at a point where we need leadership. We need the imam to have the place in the community and to be supported to be able to guide the community. Of course, that may require the imam to have more training other than just Islamic sciences like leadership training and so on and so forth. But that's what's needed in order to galvanize the community and to make it move forward, right? And decrease entering the imam into the masjid politics that doesn't make sense. Because the role is building the community, making it firm so that it can grow. So the role of the imam is the prophetic way. That's the way that masajid were established Islamically. There's reasons why when we come here, we have imamless masjid. Sometimes there's economics, but many times at this point in time, majority of the times it's not economics, it's by choice. But there's no doubt that imams need to undergo training, because now we're talking about complicated communities with diversity and, massive budgets and so on and so forth. So there's things that the imam needs support in. But when you have a strong imam and you have a very supportive community, that community goes really far. And when you have a weakened imam, that community doesn't really know who the leader is. Is it the president of the board? Is it the board? Is it the imam? And usually at the end, it ends up being nobody. Nobody's responsible for anything. That's the dilemma that we encounter, in that regard.
So how do we deal with that crisis?
The crisis of the relationship of the imam to the community, that's one way we can spell it out. or the crisis of the relationship between the imam and the board and the community, or even the imamless masjid, which is a phenomena that we see quite dominant in the U.S. This is a crisis that has multiple dimensions. And the reality is that we don't put it on the table, right? It's a known crisis with multiple dimensions. It plays itself out in different ways in different communities. Some communities don't have an imam. They don't plan on having an imam. Other communities, they keep up every year they're shifting imams, or they go for 5 years with an imam, then another 5 years without an imam. There's different reasons for these things, but let's talk about a healthy relationship between a board and an imam. How do we address that crisis to aid the community in having a sense that there's leadership from the angle of the imam and from the angle of those that are elected from the community to do the operation stuff in the masjid? Firstly, one of the things that's extremely necessary and needed is that we have to educate ourselves on how to carry out a productive relationship, imam and board. Up to date, we don't have any continuing education programs. There's minimal literature on it. There's minimal training on it. There's some institutions now that have tried to say we're doing imam training stuff, but it's yet to be seen. Even the concept of chaplaincy is not going to fulfill the role 100%. So we have to be open to the fact that we need to train ourselves on how to run the nonprofit, on what the meaning is that the masjid is operating with the tool of the nonprofit, as an organization. That's important. That needs proper training. And most of our boards, the membership don't have the training. They put very strict criteria on the imam to be in a very limited role. He has to be a hafiz of the Quran. He has to have a PhD. He has to be from an accredited university. He has to be able to provide counseling. He has to be able to deal with the youth. He has to be able to speak to the media. He has to be able to do interfaith. There's on and on. There's so many points in the criteria scale that the professional community has for the imam, but they don't hold themselves to any account with regard to what criteria they should have for themselves. This is not a criticism. This is to say we're never going to get anywhere like this, because the people that are making the criteria for the imam don't even really know what their role is, and they don't even know really what the role is of the imam in the community. You get what I'm saying? So the boards need training, and they need to know their space of operation. And they need to know the difference between management and leadership, right? And they need to know the difference between a growth-oriented type of leadership style versus micromanaging, where they're stifling the growth of themselves and the community. That's extremely important. What works in the engineering environment is not going to work in the masjid environment. In the engineering environment, the criteria in that type of setting has a lot to do with the product that is being generated, whether it's a service or actual material good. The banking leadership is, it's not going to be operational here. The corporate structure leadership is not necessarily appropriate for the masjid. That doesn't mean we can't benefit from it. But we have to realize that we're running a community organization, right, that has a certain mission to it. Not just the mission that we put in to get the legalized paperwork, but the mission that's given to us by Islam. So the Imam himself is not, most of us are not qualified to be in the position. As much as people may say, "Oh, what are you talking about?" The systems of education don't prepare you to lead the community automatically. There's just certain realities of a community that you have to train for it. A lot of imams are trained to deal with book knowledge. They're not trained to deal with people. You see what I'm saying? And then their way of dealing with book knowledge is very limited because they're coming from one way. And a lot of our communities are not necessarily one way. Some communities are. But some, more to the leaning to many of our communities are diverse. Yes. So you come in one way, you, the Imam, are going to split the community and you're going to undermine the role of the Imam because the community leadership, which is the board, is going to take over on what the decision is to be made on certain situations because of the diplomacy or the politics involved. We see that with the whole issue of Eid, the moon sighting and all that type of stuff in Ramadan. That usually the decision is not with the Imam. The decision goes back to the board. You see, you get what I'm saying? So Imams need training. And that has to be developed. Imams need leadership training. And that's why you have programs that have emerged to kind of give imams that type of leadership training. But it's not automatic that, you go and you have to spend $100,000 on a degree or $50,000. I mean, this is the type of stuff that imams are being put. The imams are not really making strong salaries as it is. There's no job security. There's no health care. And then you're asking the imam to also spend whatever from whatever salary that he has to continue his education. But that's not fair. The imam doesn't even know if at the end of the contract the imam can continue working. And most probably he migrated from another city to a masjid. So the reason why I say that is because the community has to be sensitive. So the community should be open to what other religious communities do. Establishing the idea of continuing education and development. And invest in the development of the imam. Don't be worried if the imam is going to stay or not stay. If you create the conditions, the imam will stay. But make it an investment that imam is properly trained. So the imam should be able to know how to deal with the finances of the masjid. Should have some idea. Shouldn't just be the board. The imam should also know. Because the imam is good to raise the money, to do the fundraising, but then to have an idea of the finances and how to manage them, then the imam is locked out. That's not good. Why? Because then the concept of vision is not there. Maybe the imam, if the imam is an actual leader, the imam can provide insights into how the masjid's future should look. So that's why the imam has to train in leadership, both prophetic leadership and business leadership and organizational leadership, how to deal with people. That has to be an important part. The other thing is that the imam has to have some counseling skills. So the imam should be allowed some period to be in the community. Like, firstly, you test the imam a little bit and you see the imam should be given 2 years, 2 years, a test period, and you're going to see the results in the third year. Communities are scared. That's why they have the 1-year contract. That's why we say imams have to be in agreement from the beginning. You're not going to come and just impose your one way of doing things when our community is diverse. You're going to break the community. That's why the imams have to be retrained. And some imams know that. They don't have an issue with that. They're good on that part. They know how to deal with that issue. But on the other stuff, they need training. On the leadership stuff, on the thinking outside of the box, on how do you address the community? How are you sensitive to certain issues? That's necessary. So our community has to be open to continuing development, and our boards, our community itself should demand a certain equal education for everybody on the board. It doesn't matter if you're a millionaire or if you making 100,000, if you're in this corporation or you're in this university. What does that have to do with a masjid? Make it make sense for us that your skill set, is applicable to the masjid. So that's why we say they have to have a training for being on the board of the masjid. Not just because you have these positions or so-and-so or you have this amount of money as a donor or this that you get to be on the board. You have to qualify to be on the board, right? So if we have those two things together, we have those two realities together, the imam has to be in some sort of guidance process from the community, not a testing process from the community. We're feeling you out, see where you're at. The imam has to be, imam, these are the types of challenges that we're dealing with. Let's help you work with this. You see what I'm saying? And give the imam the opportunity to learn on the job. That's what doctors do. There's an internship process. You see what I'm saying? There's an internship process before you go and you do surgery. You have to shadow. You have to see what's going on. Teachers have to shadow in the classroom. They have to spend hours in the classroom before they even get to the level of actually getting their own classroom. So imams need that. Imams need that. And they need to have imams need to have that sense of the ability to separate between work and private life. That's important, because a lot of people don't realize your phone will be ringing at 3:00 in the morning with the most trying circumstances, and now your family is disrupted because the community doesn't have boundaries. You see what I mean? And so we have to respect that, to give the imam enough energy to regroup. Some communities have moved to a nice level. Like there was a community in North Jersey. They let the young imam, go to Malaysia, finish his PhD, come back. He came back to a job. They invested. They allowed him to continue to, develop. So that's extremely important. And the other issue is giving the imam space to make decisions. And the imam also recognizing community input is important. It's not just because you studied Islamic sciences, you got it. The community input is important. So that's where you're being trained in shura, in mutual consultation. It's important. We have to learn how to do that in the real sense, and give the imam his space that's necessary as a leader, not as a symbolic, because they say spiritual advice. No, as a leader, give the imam his space, and you'll see the difference. But right now, with the role of the imam just as an employee with a very weak contract, an imam can go 15, 20 years in the community with no retirement, no health care. It doesn't work to allow that imam to grow and develop. So the re-education piece, we have to sit down and rethink it, and work it on both sides. But especially, the imams, they can help the community to develop in that way. But that's not going to happen by saying, go get another degree for $100,000, $50,000. That's just not going to happen. But, other ways we can train, get those trainings in place, and encourage imams to come together, work these problems out, go on retreats, go on sabbaticals, do this type of stuff, conferences, and work these things out, among themselves and in the community and with the help of the community. That's how you make things work and get young imams to deal with older imams that have been around the block. They have experience. Because a lot of the young brothers, they come and they're coming with whatever trends it is that they studied under. And they're not experienced in dealing with the community. So they do damage. And technically speaking, like when I was in North Jersey, it was highly debated on, is the imam muqim al-sha'ir? Is the imam like the one that does the adhan, the one that leads the salah, or is the imam actually the educator and the teacher? Now we've moved to the resident scholar idea. That's important because the imam trying to lead the salah, counsel the people, and then think about educational programs and whatever else, and the imam is under the fire because everybody's watching the imam, and there's this KPI type of system that they want to bring into the to the community. Key performance indicators. Okay, you accomplished this and you did this. A very corporate type of approach that puts the imam on edge. On top of the controlling of the minbar, you can't say this, you can't do this. That type of thing that creates it creates an inept person, a person that's gonna fear to actually really service the community. But the imam has to realize you're not alone. You're working with the community. And even Ibn Taymiyyah had that model in the political thought, like the political leadership should work with the ulama or with the scholars. The masajid can have that concept too, but the board is operations. The board is operations. The board is not, if the board is not going to step out to actual leadership, the board is not the leadership of the community. The board is operations. You're managing the infrastructure. You're making things work to facilitate for that leadership to arise. And it could be that it arises in conjunction with the imam, but the board, how can the board be the leadership of the masjid if it's supposed to be changing? And you know what I'm saying? It can't be the leadership in that sense. And how can the board solve the problem between the families or represent the community in the public sphere? That's just not the case that's happening. So we still need to clarify the role of the imam in this country, which hasn't been done 100%. And that's causing a lot of the younger imams that are bright not to want to be imams in the masjids anymore. They're leaving. And they want to be independent. You know what I'm saying? But so that's part of the solution is the education piece and the in-house, training. The in-house training in the masjid itself and giving time for that person to develop. So there has to be a clear understanding that we're investing in you, you're investing in us. It's a mutual benefit type of situation. And conflict management. Oh, that's a big piece. That's a big piece. Imams have to know you push too hard on certain things, you're going to break the community. Board members have to know that you can't just hide behind certain legal realities on the board so that you don't get sued. No, you can't use the community's money to drag the community into a court case and then to sue the other board members or to fight with the imam. That stuff goes on all across the country right now because there's no actual conflict resolution process in place and there's no clarity of roles in space and how the decision make. So there's these fights that occur. You see what I'm saying? So we need to clarify the relationships between the two entities, the imam and the board, and we need to train to work together, not to train to be oppositional, train to work together and to make decisions, and to think about the interests of the community, and to continue to develop ourselves those are some things that I think, are important. I've seen that in other communities. You can't be a Catholic priest in the real sense without continuous training. You're trained how to run the church. See what I'm saying? You're trained in how to service the community. They have that. But imams are not. The rabbi is the leader in the community. And when they have these boards that operate the way that they operate, usually that doesn't function too well. They have similar problems in that regard when it comes to trying to democratize the governance structure of the religious institution. It becomes all political. We need to decrease that. Like the masjid is not that space. That space for the political tussling is outside in society over real resources. It's not fighting in the institution that is there that's supposed to be to develop people spiritually and develop the fraternity among the believers. It's that type of tussling belongs in the society. In the political struggle in the society over resources, over lobbying, over policy, over school boards, that type of things, and that out there in that sphere. And that's what our community confuses. They turn the masjid into that because they don't realize, no, this is not your kingdom, or this is not your fiefdom, or whatever it is. This is the house of Allah wa ta'ala.
How can a masjid be balanced in servicing the needs of the overall community while at the same time ensuring no one is feeling left out?
That question, it comes into addressing for some masjids specifically the issue of diversity, right? So here the servicing of the community and, balancing that service out, making people feel like they're included in the process. In many ways, that's a new reality for us, right? And if you don't work it properly, what ends up happening is people splinter off either internally in the masjid or outside of the masjid. And usually people are associating outside of the masjid anyway. And, when you have ethnic groups in the masjid, people stick together with their tribes, or birds of a feather flock together type of thing. But being aware of the community's conditions and situations is one of the first things that's necessary for the masjid to do. To develop a consciousness and awareness of the community. What are their needs? Where are they coming from? What are the aspirations? And there you can take a lesson from corporate America from the angle of know the customer. Even though we're not looking at the average Muslim as a customer, but that makes sense for people as a simple way of saying, know who you're dealing with, know your audience. Know who you're servicing. Know who's a part of your community. And the tricky thing with that is that whoever is on the leadership side, both imam and board, have to develop a way of dealing with each community. The Prophet ﷺ, he knew the way that the various tribes spoke. So each of those tribes, they felt that he was part of them because of the issue of him understanding their language. And so that's how each community should feel. That the masjid and the imam, they understand us, or at least the imam understands us, and the board can support that. If the board participates, is good in terms of facilitating that process. It gets complicated when you try to be too inclusive, and then you want to have every representation from every community. Then you start seeing, the politics come out. So that has to be somewhat controlled a little bit. You know what I'm saying? That has to be somewhat controlled, to not for the sake of control, but for the sake of stabilizing the community for growth, because you don't want to have infighting. one ethnic group trying to control the masjid over another ethnic group. So the community has to be educated also on how to be in the masjid that's diverse, because the community sometimes does not have an understanding of how to do that. Even at the level of planning for events, it's necessary. You can't just service one community, in the way that food is done, in the way that, the event is oriented. If you're just servicing one community in that regard, you're gonna alienate the rest of the community. There's no doubt about it. And that's why it's important to celebrate that diversity. And it's sad because the non-Muslims, they learned this the hard way with the battle with racism. They learned that diversity, equity, and inclusion is important and is an asset in the workplace if it's leveraged properly. And the same thing for us. Like, as a community, if you have a community that has multiple languages, that gives you access to so many other resources. You understand what I'm saying? It gives you access to economy. It gives you access to insight. That's where we need to be thinking in big picture. How do we recognize the value of people in themselves as human beings, but also in what they're bringing to the table in terms of their skill set and, their merits and their insights? How do we recognize that? And then how do we synthesize these things and build a stronger community? That's the level of leadership that we don't have at this point. But the masjid begins with smaller things like sending the message out. And also the imam has to be trained in that, like, you're dealing with a diverse community. You can't just only talk about Palestine and just make dua for only the Arab countries and you're leaving out everybody else. You can't just be focused on the Desi community and then you're leaving out the Africans. You can't just be focused on these larger communities and you're leaving out the Bosnians. You can't just be focusing on the African Americans and, you're leaving out the Burmese and the other communities. The divisiveness, we have to realize that's a problem. And we have it because when frustration kicks in, we turn to us and them. But it's not Islamic. So the masjid has the role and the responsibility of working through that and creating activities, right? Creating activities that allow people to be comfortable with each other, allow people to, because some people, it's not that easy for them to break from their culture. And some of us have learned that by interacting with the Muslims. Some communities will never eat the food of another community, period. That's just how they operate. It's not offensive, but they're trained like that. Their palate is like that. Their essence is like that. And we have to realize that's how they are. It's not like the way that we grew up in the US. You go into multiple restaurants, you're eating from this, you develop your own, your own cuisines because you're taking from here and taking from there, the hodgepodge type of approach. That's not how some of our community members are. Some of our community members, they have a set time of eating, they have a set food of eating, and they won't deviate from that. That mindset can't dominate the masjid though. You know what I'm saying? It has to be a mindset, yarhamukallah, that is inclusive. So that's a conversation for the imam and the board. And, if you have some sort of group that's in charge of, welcoming the community and facilitating that process, which that's what's needed. You need some people that are just focused on that, on making the people feel welcome and integrating people into the community. Doesn't always have to come from some sort of top-down approach. It could come from, right within, but with the support of, of the imam and the board. Because there's politics in that.